Hi.
Warning: the following presentation is for educational purposes only, which contains graphic descriptions of crimes and is intended for mature audiences only. Viewer discretion is advised.
Israel Keyes was born on January 7, 1978 in Richmond, Utah. He was raised Mormon for a bit until the family made the move to Colville, Washington, and joined the white supremacist Christian Church, as well as the Christian Israel Covenant Church. The family lived in a small cabin with no running water or electricity. Plus, Israel and his 9 siblings had to hunt for their own food. Israel later renounced the Christian religion, became an atheist, got disowned by his family, developed an interest to commit murder, and served in the army from 1998 to 2001. Okay, fast forward. On February 1st, 2012, Israel was sneaking around Anchorage, Alaska, where he was living at the time, with murder on his mind. He came across a tiny coffee shop. Samantha Koenig was working that night, and when Israel approached the coffee shop, he places an order to distract Samantha. When she turns around, Israel now has her at gunpoint, telling her to shut the lights off, and he climbs through the window and abducts her. Israel brings Samantha to a shed outside his house, where he lived with his girlfriend and his daughter. He tells Samantha he only wants to use her for ransom and needs her debit card, which he ended up having to break into Samantha's boyfriend's truck to retrieve. Once he returned to the shed with the card in hand, Israel and strangles her to death. He then leaves Samantha in the shed and goes on a 7-day cruise like nothing happened. Once the cruise was over, he went running around Texas causing havoc. He robbed the bank at gunpoint, then robbed the house and set it on fire, before heading back to the shed. Once there, he waited for Samantha to thaw out and her again. He eventually texted Samantha's boyfriend from her phone, leading them to a park where a picture of Samantha holding a newspaper was found in an attempt to provide proof of life, as well as a ransom note demanding $30,000 be deposited in Samantha's bank account. In reality, Israel sewed her eyes open and applied some makeup and positioned her for the photo. Shortly after, Israel dismembered and disposed of her remains in Matanuska Lake. Disguised Israel started to hit up multiple ATMs in different states to keep a low profile. But an ATM in Arizona was able to catch his white Ford Focus rental on camera, so police were on the lookout. In Texas, Israel would use yet another ATM, alerting the police who were monitoring Samantha's card usage. On March 13th, 2012, Israel was pulled over for driving slightly over the speed limit and for fitting the description of the vehicle in question. Once officers saw Israel's Alaskan ID, he called for backup. Police found a mask, a bag of stolen cash, a gun, and Samantha's debit inside of his rental. He was transferred back to Alaska and taken into custody. For the first few weeks, Israel denied any claims against him and would not talk to investigators, despite all the evidence found in his rental. But on March 31st, 2012, he confessed to taking Samantha, but wanted to make a deal with police. Israel would tell them what happened in its entirety if it was kept away from the media. He didn't want his daughter to learn about the he was doing. Once Israel was confident that investigators would hold up their end of the bargain, he began to talk, providing all the gruesome details that brought police to Matanuska Lake, where they found Samantha's remains. Israel then spoke of his involvement in the disappearances of multiple people from 1997 to 2012. He mentioned kill kits he'd hidden around the US. These kill kits contain the contents he would need to commit his crimes. For example, zip ties, guns, ammunition, gloves, shovel, even Drano, etc. Israel confessed to the 2011 murder of Bill and Lorraine Currier from Access, Vermont, where Keyes broke into the Currier home, tying them both up before shooting Bill and sexually assaulting Lorraine and strangling her to death. Their bodies were never found. Israel learned the details he told police ended up on Vermont News. This caused him to shut down, and he then attempted to make a new deal, saying if they wanted more information, they needed to promise Israel would be sentenced to death. Deep down, Israel knew they would not give him what he wanted, and on December 2nd, 2012, police found Israel lying face down in a pool of blood. He managed to get a hold of a blade and slit his wrists, along with tying a bedsheet around his neck and ankle to ensure when he lost consciousness he would strangle to death. Israel was pronounced dead at 6:13 a.m. In his cell, investigators found a 4-page suicide note, barely legible due to its blood saturation, along with pictures of skulls drawn with his blood found under his bed. After years of investigating, the police discovered multiple kill kits and believe Israel murdered 11 people throughout the United States. There could potentially be more victims, but now we'll never know. Sick.